screams in the night. Indian legends. Miles of footprints. Sightings. What are these elusive hominids that stalk the wilderness? Join us for eyewitness accounts, questions and answers, Bigfoot encounters of the past, and ongoing encounters in the present. Your host, two-time witness, field researcher for 43 years, William Jevning. Welcome to the mystery. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of Creek Devil. Brian, I'm going to have you take the microphone and introduce our guest and start the interview.
Sure. So we're joined by Dave Shealy, who runs the official Skunk Ape headquarters down in South Florida. So welcome, Dave. And just out of curiosity, so how long have you been running the Skunk Ape headquarters?
Oh, I think I went public with it in about 1991, but I've had a little headquarters, so to speak, off the highway since I was probably a teenager, maybe 15 years old, where I would find things in the woods and put in it, and I would bring people in and show them. But now it's a full-fledged operation with I have employees, and it's a happening place. There's a lot going on here.
Now, about the skunk ape, when did you yourself first see one?
When I was 10 years old. That's what got my interest. I was out behind the property here. I live in the Big Cypress National Preserve. It's a 900,000 acre preserve, but it adjoins Everglades National Park and a lot of other wild areas. I live in the middle of the largest wild area east of the Mississippi River. It's several million acres.
Okay.
And this is where I saw the skunk ape, and this is where my research is conducted.
Okay. And how many skunk apes have you seen in your lifetime?
Well, on 3 different occasions, I've come within sight of them, and it was a pretty incredible experience. When I was young, of course, when I was 10 years old, and then later on in life, I took some photographs, and a few years past that, I actually got some video footage that some people may have seen on YouTube only, and that's with the skunk ape, or on news channels of a skunk ape running across the marsh here in the Everglades. It's some incredible footage. It's never really been researched or looked into by anybody to speak of. As a matter of fact, no one's ever asked me to take them to that location. I do have inquiries on a regular basis from entertainment television shows like Finding Bigfoot or Definitive Evidence. They all get a hold of me, but those reality television shows, I feel, are really going to bastardize what I have. I'm really looking more like National Geographic. I do actually do a lot of film work, and I'm not going to cut myself short. I'm not going to sell out to what's going on television today.
Right. Well, kind of an inside joke. I mean, we call that show Not Finding Bigfoot because we don't think they're ever going to find it with those researchers.
I generally don't say that, but I always say they should. I've always said they're never going to find Bigfoot. But yeah, I agree with you.
Now, out of curiosity, though, so you're down in the Everglades. Why are you in that location? I mean, because I live here in Orlando, and but there have been reports of the swamp ape or the skunk ape in different parts of Florida besides the Everglades. Do you ever get any reports besides down in South Florida?
Yeah, of course I do. I was the one who validated the Myakka monster, the Myakka skunk ape. You see the picture of it with the coming in the palmettos. That was sent to the police department over near.
Oh,
I was in Sarasota or St. Pete when those pictures came out, and the police department actually tracked me down and asked me to take a look at them, and then that kind of set into motion those pictures being on the internet and the popularity of the Myakka monster.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Dave, can you fill?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when you get a moment, could you fill us in and just give us a little bit of the history and the background on that? Because it'd be very interesting.
On the Myakka photograph?
Yeah, absolutely. Now that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the one with it's sitting. It's nighttime, but you got these red eyes. You can see the outline of an ape behind the palmettos. Is that the one we're thinking of?
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out what direction the show should take, because there's so many things we can talk about it. But we're going to take off in that direction right now, and I'll tell you what I know about that. The pictures were shown to me. I looked at them. It is more or less exactly what I've been seeing, except that the hair was a little longer on it. And I don't know if you've seen where they do layovers of an orangutan over the top of that picture, but it's pretty incredible. It actually measures up scientifically to being an orangutan in facial appearance. And if you ever get a chance to get a look at that, I don't know where to find it, but I've looked at it several times. It's incredible. Well, here's what's going on in the Big Cypress right now. My research, since I live in a national park, my family moved here in 1890, you'd ask. That's why we're here. We've been here a while. I have a unique property. All the land around me has been bought up by the federal government. My only neighbors are Seminole Indians, and they're my friends. So back to the Myakka photograph. So I've had a wall up by the national park against my research for probably 15 years. They just said I was like a flim-flam man in the swamp, and I was trying to hawk a T-shirt. Well, I'm a human being. I got to make a living. Of course, you got to make money to live. But that wasn't my main objective with the skunk ape. What I was trying to do was make people aware that we had a species here that has yet to be identified. Well, after 15 years, the Park Service has finally partnered, the National Park Service, with an orangutan facility in Indonesia. And they're bringing researchers here to the preserve to go into the swamps where I've uncovered these nests in the trees. I call them bedding areas. And so it's not just me seeing something. Many people have, and it's actually being investigated right now by the government, has been for the last year and a half, I recall, is when the first time I saw them in the field. So just so you know. And so what I'm seeing, and if you ever see my footage, is not an orangutan. It has a longer upper body torso. It runs completely on two legs when it's really on the move. The photographs, you don't see the deer in the photographs, but it's actually chasing the deer. And if you're lucky enough to see the footage, it's in about 1.5 feet of water the whole time. So it goes down the tree line. But when it crosses the field in front of me, 10 minutes later, and I think this is in July, I mean, it was hot, and starts across the field where the deer had run, it's traveling like it's running through 1.5 feet of water at close to 15 miles an hour. And you can see at one point in it where it is really a wild animal, and both arms are clearly off the ground. And so there's a lot of similarities I found between orangutans and what I'm seeing. But what I'm seeing is much taller than an orangutan and has a different mobility.
Dave, I've seen that video. I've watched it 3 or 4 times, knowing that we're going to be interviewing you tonight. And it's very fascinating. It's got a kind of a brownish red color to it, and it's standing upright. And it may look sort of like orangutan, but just for the people out there, it's not an orangutan, right?
No, it is absolutely not. People see them here in trees. That's a common sighting. That's the difference between the Bigfoot sightings and what we have here. About 50% of the sightings that are reported to my headquarters are of these things in trees, and they're 500-600 pound animals. They're incredible strength, but we have a lot of water on the ground here, and so I can only think that a Bigfoot or whatever would want to get out of the water occasionally, so that they've got this tree behavior here in the Everglades that's kind of unheard of across the country.
Dave, I've seen that. I think I've seen the video that you're referring to as well. Is there a way that you could stabilize that? Because, how they did with the Patterson film, where they were able to kind of stabilize it, and is there a way that you could do that?
The original footage was quite shaky, but if you go on YouTube, Dave Shealy Skunk Ape footage, that has already been stabilized.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was stabilized.
Okay.
About a year after I took the things, but the original was real shaky.
Okay, that might be the one that I saw. Yeah. So I'll check that out. But
yeah, I was freestanding, and I had a zoom lens. I didn't have a tripod. I wasn't prepared for what happened. And so I was basically standing there with a zoom lens, and that was what accounted for the shakiness. It was more or less my heartbeat, the wind, whatever. You don't have to move much when you're on Zoom.
Yeah. Now, there was one article that I came across that described it, and they weren't necessarily quoting you, but they were describing it as it's different. The skunk ape is different than a normal Bigfoot. Can you maybe explain some of the differences?
Okay, one of the things is they're spotted in trees. People do associate odors with Bigfoot. You don't hear about it that much, but most people who encounter a fresh skunk ape bed or have an encounter with where one's close, there's this accompanying awful skunky smell. And the third thing, and I would say it's probably the most apparent, is that the tracks that I find are four-toed tracks. I've yet to find a five-toed track, and I've collected several hundred track samples. At first, I thought it was an anomaly in the beginning, but I think that this is pretty much a fact now. They're four-toed.
And are the prints consistent in how they look with the four toes? In terms of how big they are, like lengthwise and widthwise.
Yeah. It's like a big human track with four apparent toes, and that's what I'm finding. And it was in the beginning, it was a real big turnoff to the Bigfoot community in the Pacific Northwest. People were calling me, but things are what they are, and these are the tracks that I find, and tracks other people find, and they can sometimes be confused, although they don't have the webbing. But we have some really large alligators down here that weigh 800, 1,000 pounds, and this time of year, when the water levels are dropping, and they're walking these low swamps from one water hole to the other, trying to keep up with the water and the food supply, they leave big tracks, almost 12 to 13 inches long, and sometimes people get confused. But the skunk ape tracks there's no webbing between the toes, and the toes are a little thicker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I find.
Yeah. And how often do you get reports from people in that area?
In this area, it varies, and that's a good question, because I'll tell you how the reports come in. I'll get a report maybe 50 miles from me of somebody has said they've seen something cross the road near their house, or it could be any number of things. And I listen, and I do what I can to investigate. But then I'll get another call a week later, and somebody telling me that they're seeing something, and it's only 5 miles from the last report, and they don't even know each other. And so that's kind of how they come in, and that's the strange part of it. And that's how I base the number of skunk apes that we have here in the Everglades, is by the size of the tracks and the reported sightings. I'll tell you where I'm getting a lot of calls about, and it's from people. 2 people have recalled, and they don't even live there. They were just passing through. But this is off of I-95 all the way up by St. Petersburg. I've had 2 reports from passers by on I-95 who've seen something, and I've had a couple people call in, and that's just been in the last month. So when I hear things like that, when it starts to trend in an area and people are seeing it, I can't help but believe it after talking to the people, because they don't know each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, when 2 people, complete strangers, are reporting the same thing, that's pretty good evidence that there might be something there.
As far as I'm concerned, it's real good evidence. Doesn't necessarily mean there is, but there's a high probability that there's something worth looking into. Yeah, and so I do some investigations out of my area, but mostly I keep it here. It's just easier, because I'll have people come in all the time. Hey, we just saw skunk ape down the road. And then I'll listen to them, and they'll tell me where, and I know it's a bear crossing, and the bears are a little thin around here sometimes, and they look like monkeys, except they're on all 4. So I just kind of discount those. But when somebody comes in and says, hey, it was on 2 legs, walking across the road, a lot of people saw it, I go down and take a look. I do that every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, what do you think that they eat? What's their diet like? I mean, deer probably, because you said that. Well, obviously they were chasing one.
Yeah. I know what they eat. They're omnivores. They're survivalists, just like black bears. They're going to eat plants and animals. They eat fish. They eat snakes. They eat alligators. They eat grasses. We have believe it or not, there's a lot of available food sources of the plants here. There's pond apples, acorns. We have palms, palm berries. There's a lot of food here. There's tons and tons and tons of food here in the Everglades. So that was one of the things is in the beginning. We're like, how could an animal survive here that was that large? There's just not enough food around. But that couldn't be further from the truth. You just got to know what you can eat and what you can't.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, don't eat any mushrooms in the Everglades or you'll be sorry. I can tell you that right now. But there is a lot of things you can eat.
Yeah. Have you ever found any other things besides prints, like hair samples or anything like that? Or
yeah, I have some that I haven't done anything with, but I see he don't do it no more. But his name was Robert Stack. He was the voice
Unsolved Mysteries.
Of Unsolved Mysteries. Yeah, and I actually knew him through my research, and I did a show with him where they went in great detail. In fact, I've done a lot of television overseas, not so much in recent years. I've just kind of backed off. I do a lot of behind-scenes work with television shows, and I don't get in front of the camera very often. But they actually took the hair and had it analyzed. They had it microscopical something done to it and DNA, and it both came back unknown species. So they knew what it wasn't, but they couldn't tell what it was. And that's kind of the way that left hanging. Now, they had this show called Definitive Evidence on, and that was where it was like a bunch of know-it-alls sitting around a table, basically debunking anything that ever happened with anybody that saw Bigfoot or had a Bigfoot bone or whatever. And they contacted me, and I have a tooth that I found in a forest, and it's a human tooth, but it's a huge tooth. And I was thinking about maybe giving it to them and letting them look into it. But like I said, I'm just so so disappointed in the quality of television when it comes to Bigfoot. I just decided not to. You get tired of it. You get tired of it. Well, we're going to be coming down from New York, and we're going to be staying over on South Beach, and we'd like to come out. We're going to be down there for 3 days. We want to go skunk ape hunting with you. And by the way, we don't have any money, so we're not going to be able to help you out at all. But we want to come to a television show. I ain't got time for that crap. I mean, I'm not sap. What do they think I am? I mean, that's the way it is, though. And we could talk about that a little more. I mean, because that's my hot button. My hot button is that I live in a national park. And when you film in a national park, you have to get permits from the government to do it. It's a highly regulated thing. You have to have a park ranger go with you into the forest while you film. You're not allowed to run around filming a damn television show in the middle of the Everglades. That's illegal. They don't want to deal with that. All of these shows you're seeing on TV, they don't want to deal with that. They don't want nothing to do with that. That's why you get what you get on TV. You get crap. That's what you get.
Yeah, exactly.
People wanting to make a fast buck, jerking somebody around on his couch once a week for 2 months over something that's not even real. Yeah, so I'm just done with it. And I make a lot of money off of them shows. I take them places. I hold a lot of permits for restricted wildlife, and I'm behind the scenes on a lot of running shows right now. And like I said, it's crap. I mean, I make money at it, but it's nothing. It's not real. Television is fake. Hello? Hello, world.
Yeah.
Fake TV. All right.
Yeah,
okay.
Going back to the DNA thing, Will knows of a story too where, Will, if you want to go over the details real quick. But anyways, though, they did get, I think they even got blood, if I'm not mistaken. But like the same thing that, as you said, though, it goes back, and when they test it comes back as, unknown species or unknown primate.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Well, what I'm seeing is a real. What I have seen are real live creatures, animals, primates. I know this. People around here see it. It's just a matter of fact to me. I really don't understand, though, why of all the Bigfoot stuff, in the country, why they haven't got more evidence, because I've got a bunch of it here. I'm just one person.
Yeah.
I've collected tracks. I've taken photographs. I've photographed the bedding areas. I mean, come on. What do you want me to do? Go out and kill one? I mean, that's about and that's not going to happen. So people say, well, there's no evidence. Bullshit. I've got evidence. I've had evidence. Why hasn't anybody looked into my film and says, it's a great idea to blow it off as a guy in a gorilla suit, but unfortunately, science and the truth is that it's not a guy in a gorilla suit. Hello? But nobody's done that.
You
can simply prove it by the mobility of the animal and how fast it's running, how long it was upright. I mean, it's just matter of fact. So to say there's no evidence, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I think there's a new show called Expedition Bigfoot. Have they reached out to you at all? Have you heard anything from them?
No, not yet. Oh. Not yet. I'm going to have a hard time holding a straight face when they do get here. Yep. That's
now the primatologist from that show she's from Miami. She's from South Florida.
I got
not that it means anything.
What size is she? Is she a B cup, a D cup? Because that's how you get on a show like that. So let's just cut the chase. But maybe I'm wrong. They do that.
Yeah.
With a good-looking girl on the show. If she's a hot chick, they want her on there because that's ratings. I'll have to meet her, and if I'm wrong, I apologize. But I'm just saying, All right, let's go.
Yeah. You know, the just out of curiosity, with the reports that you get, are they mostly just simply like real quick sightings, or have there ever been any reports of them actually with like a longer, in terms of time, longer sighting, and maybe have there ever been any signs of aggression from them, or anything like that?
Yeah. Oh, there's been a lot of incidents where people have had like a more than just a glance at a skunk ape. For instance, about 9 years ago, there were 2 European women on a road near me called Turner River Road, and they were photographing bromeliads. And a bromeliad is like we call them air plants. And in the springtime of the year, they put a really pretty bloom on it. So they were stopping. They had a convertible going down the road, getting out, setting out their tripod, and photographing these bromeliads. Well, they heard something rustling in the bushes by their car. They turned and looked back, and out of the bushes came this huge, they called it an ape man. And it was growling at them. It went in the bushes, came out a couple of times. They were scared for their lives. They ran to the car and jumped in it and went to the National Park Service, and that's where they reported the incident. But what made the incident unusual, they sent them down to talk to me after they got down to the visitor center. They said, you need to go talk to this guy. What was unusual was it had an erection. And that's what they were saying. Like it was like it was like a sexual type encounter. And it scared the hell out of them. So there was that incident. Then there's the incident at there's 2 tribes of Indians that live nearby. There's the Seminole Indians and the Miccosukee Indians. And for years, they had no fences around their camps or anything. And you drive down the road and they're out there taking a bath or whatever. It was nice at times. Sometimes it wasn't so nice. But they've come a long way. They got a lot of money now. They got the casinos and they live in, $250,000 homes. But they have a church and there's a fence around it. And just recently they put the fence up, and they're claiming that a skunk ape went into their church and tore up everything. They said it tore everything off the walls. It busted off the doors. And so now it's fenced in. So that's something that's recent. And so that's out from the Indian tribe. Now, back in the 70s, there were 4 hunters at a hunting camp in the Everglades. And they were playing cards in the cabin. And they had a lantern hanging up, and they were cooking on the stove. Well, there was an oak tree that grew near the cabin, grew up, and a limb grew out over the oak tree. And it's like 10 o'clock at night. They're playing cards. They're just finished up cooking. And a skunk ape had crawled up into that oak tree, and it fell off the limb and came right down through the roof of the cabin, busted the roof in, knocked the light out. For just a second, they had a brief look at it. Then, thank God, the fire went out. Big crash, boom, bang. They finally got some light to see what had happened, and it had taken out the whole back wall of the cabin and ran off into the forest. So there's been incidences like that, and I could tell you 100 stories that I've heard from the Seminole Indians.
Oh,
you
yeah.
Want to hear one?
Yeah.
Okay.
We've heard a lot of, well, not just in Florida, but a lot of stories on reservations and things like that. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, there's the simple ones from up around Brighton on the north side of Lake Ochopee, where the old Indian man told me he was sitting in his cheeky and he was looking out over the cow pasture and he saw one walk across the cow pasture. I mean, he told me that. He got no reason to lie to me. And so I believe it. But here, when the Seminoles were at war and they were being pushed down into Florida, and the Seminoles got down here, I live in the heart of the Everglades. This is I live exactly in the middle. I mean, like on half a mile east. I mean, I live in the stronghold of the Seminole tribe. In the forest I live in is where when they decided to end the war, because it was the longest and most deadliest Indian war in American history, and the government says there's not enough of them, forget it, we've had enough. These Seminoles never surrendered. They're my friends. They're my neighbors right now. But they lived right here in the forest around my house. So when they got here during the war, they tell me that they came into contact with some skunk apes that were living in a palmetto hammock out on the marshes. One of the Indians had seen them there. But they were pretty worn out. They were beaten. They had no clothes. They had no weapons. They were, for the most part, naked. And they had a meeting where the elders all got together, and they decided that they needed all the help that they could get. They had taken in some escaped slaves, and I don't know if you've heard of the Black Seminole, but a lot of the escaped slaves headed into Florida and wound up here in the Everglades, and they fought side by side with the Seminoles. But the Seminoles wanted even more strength, and they thought that if they could communicate with this group of skunk apes that they had found down here, that they would have an ally that was strong, knew the woods, and could help them. So they sent an Indian in to this hammock where they had found these skunk apes, and the Indian went in, and a few days later he came back, and he told them, he says, yes, I found them. And I tried to explain to them what was going on and that we needed help. But they didn't understand what I was saying. We couldn't communicate, and it just wasn't going to happen. And that was the message that he returned with. So, yeah, they believe in it. They know that what I'm seeing is real. Now, the 100-year-old medicine man now, he's a friend of mine. He passed away. He told me, he said, David, he said, what you're seeing is a spirit. It's a spirit that lives inside the earth, and not everyone can see it. Some people will see it, and some people won't. He said, but this is what, he told me, this is what we believe. And so, they have a lot of beliefs. And I've actually found the skunk ape tracks coming out of alligator dens during the dry season, where for whatever reason, they'll go and take refuge in these caves in the banks as the water drops. So there's a lot of truth in what he told me. So that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I've heard that too before about them going into alligator dens too. But let me ask you, going back to the church incident for a second, did the people do anything to provoke that Sasquatch? Was it just pissed off, or did it just kind of do that on its own?
I don't know what happened. I don't know. I was in that. I went to that church. It was Easter. This past Easter, I went to the Easter service there. There's just a few Indians that attend, mainly old men, and I sat with them. And I hadn't heard anything about it. I just heard about this recently, so I got to look into it.
Huh. Yeah. Now,
I was wondering. I'm going to jump in real quick. I'm just going to throw in a comment more than a question, and I was just kind of wondering if that didn't tear into the church and tear things up as kind of a territorial. Maybe it felt like as an invasion of its territory, or it was trying to take dominance over that territory. I don't know. And if you have a thought on that, that'd be interesting.
I don't, like I said, I really haven't formed any opinions on it yet. I don't know. We haven't had bad bugs. I cannot, maybe something try to get in there to get out of the mosquitoes or to get away from the high water. And we just haven't had either of those right now. So I don't know what would have provoked it. Yeah. And I'm trying to think. Where did I just read this just the other night. I just read it the other night. So I'm a little, I normally have Indians stop by and see me every day, and I would ask one, but I've been busy today. I've been shooting a rap video. Yeah, for the money. That's it. with Little Yachty. You probably never heard of him. He's 22 years old. He's got $8 million in the bank. He's here at my place now. So, you got to make it where you can, but whatever. But that's why I haven't found out more about it, because I haven't had anybody. We've been on set. We've had everything quiet today. I haven't really been up to the front to see what's going on, or I would have had the answer for you.
Well, Dave, just in general, do you think that they're very territorial? Will they show signs of aggression if humans get too close?
Well, I'm sure that they would. And in saying that, I got to tell you that there are huge areas, 50,000 acres, 40,000 acre areas that nobody has stepped foot in the last 40 years here in the Everglades. So even though they may be territorial, I think that they still back off into areas where they're not going to be disturbed nevertheless. Now, if you were to go into one of the areas that they've kind of set up a new camp at, you could be in for trouble. The Indians say if you shoot one in the woods, watch out, because you'll never make it out alive. And there's been a lot of people come up missing in the Everglades in my lifetime.
Yeah. Do you trace that to this creature, do you think? Those missing people?
Some of the incidences, definitely, sure. Like hunters that don't come out of the woods and there's never a trace found. Well, something happened. They died, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a mystery. The Everglades is full of mysteries. There's things that go on here that don't go on anywhere else. That's for sure. It's like I said, it's a wild area. It's the largest wild area east of the Mississippi, and we have the unconquered Seminole Indians that live here, and they continue with their religion and their culture and way of life like they did 200 years ago. And a lot of things that they do are not acceptable in America today. A lot of their practices would be taboo. So there's a lot of things that aren't talked about as well here.
Now, when you do get reports, do you get reports of them being alone, or do you think that when you see one, there are probably more that are by near there that you don't see?
They normally are one animal, but there are occasionally multiple sightings. And where I'm at, there's a big swamp called the Fakahatchee. It's called the Fakahatchee Strand State Preserve, and it's this huge, giant swamp. And people have over the years have reported multiple sightings, that's an anomaly in my research that I get this. Oh, we saw a couple of skunk apes cross the trail, or we saw 3 skunk apes. I get sightings like that out of that area, but where I'm at, and generally the Everglades as a whole, it's individual animals.
And let me ask you too, the people in your area, are there still a lot of skeptics around where you live, or are people kind of more open-minded to the possibility that the creature exists?
Well, at first, in my area, all I got's a bunch of park rangers from out of town. There's 300 of them. Yeah, they're not skeptical as much as they were. They're becoming more open-minded. I don't really run into a lot of skeptics anymore. I know they're out there. There's, let's face it, there's haters in the world. If you're doing good, they want to put you down because I guess it makes them feel good. But there's nobody here doing the real research, and nobody that's putting feet on the ground and going into the woods. So if I do get some negative feedback, I just think, it's just some know-it-all, and I just blow it off.
Yeah. Now, I know that you do tours too, right? So are there any skeptics that come on your tour that didn't believe in the subject, but then after going on your tour and seeing your place, the headquarters, and all the evidence, that they left very, very convinced that it does exist?
Well, the tours are sanctioned by the national park. All of the guides that do the tours have to go through a course by the national park because it takes place in the national park. And on our general tours, and we take out 50 to 100 people a day into the Everglades, a lot of them are here for the skunk ape, but the tour guide isn't free to discuss a skunk ape as being a real living being because that's against park rules. So they have to say, well, it's a local, and I have a lot of pull on how it's explained, but it's not a local myth. I told them that right out the gate. Don't be calling me a myth. So they call it a local legend. Uh-huh. And they talk about the legend of the skunk ape. And most everybody who actually comes here and sees the vastness of the area and just the abundance of life here leaves convinced that there's maybe there's a little more to it than what they're seeing because they're only here a little time, and the forests are so big. So in that way, they're convinced. Yeah. Now, as far as me personally taking people out skunk ape hunting, once again, I would rather starve to death than sit in a class and have a park ranger tell me what I can say and what I can't say. Yeah. And I refuse to get a permit. My son holds all of those permits for this park, and he has turned the park around. We're a thriving business. I gave the land. My brother and I decided to give him the land and let him and watch him live out his life, and he's doing very well with it. I'm here on the property now. I have a home, and my bills are paid for life, so I can't complain. But I do take people out, but when I do, I have to bring guides with me, and then there's the transportation that's involved, and if they really want to go looking, and there's food to bring along. You can call it food, you can call it catering, you can call it what you want. Well, you can call it gets expensive. That's the best thing to call it. Just a typical expedition for two people for a night in the Everglades is $2,500. And that's because I got to pay the swamp buggy $1,500 out the gate. Then you got to buy food, and it sounds like I'm being like a sleazy or something, but I don't really make anything. That's just what it costs. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I'm getting old. I'm 56 years old. Somebody says, "Well, we'll just walk then. We'll come down, go Bigfoot hunting with you, and we'll just walk with you." Well, I mean, goddamn, it's the Everglades. I'm 56 years old. Give me a break. Why don't you go for a walk without me? So that's just where I'm at with that, Like you guys, we talked and did the podcast, and you come down here, and you're like, "Dave, we want to look around." I'll be more than happy to show you where to go, to tell you what to do, and chances are you'll be successful if you want to do it. But I don't really want to go camping, Yeah. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I don't like have to make a commitment. But I mean, you'd have a good time, and I would put you in some hot spots, no doubt. And I'd do a little extra for you guys, you know that. But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Hey, Dave, I got to tell you real quick, my favorite story that you have of this skunk ape is when I think you were 10 years old, you and your brother, and the grass was too high, whatever kind of swamp grass they got there, and your brother was seeing it. Can you tell that story? He put you on your shoulders or something?
Yeah, they actually reenacted all that on Unsolved Mysteries. So if you ever get a chance to see that episode, you should watch it because they went into great detail. But my brother and I, there was a rule in the house, if we could kill a deer before the school bus came, we didn't have to go to school because we had to clean it and package it. That's what we ate. That's what we live on. But I grew up poor. And so we got up early that morning and took off out of the back of the park here, and we're walking, and my brother said, hey, stop, there's something up ahead. And I couldn't see because the grass was so high. And he was looking real hard, and he said, it's a skunk ape. And I said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, it's a skunk ape. And I said, let me see. And he picked me up. He just kind of picked me up under the arms, lifted me up to where I was about his head height, not up over his head, but I got my head up there where his head was, where I could see out. And about 100 yards in front of us in some grass, it was about 5 foot of grass or so, there was this big animal walking along like a man, just plowing through the grass. And we had a gun. And to this day, I don't know. I mean, we're always taught if you shoot something, eat it. We just didn't shoot anything. We shot what we were hunting. For some reason, we didn't shoot it. I'm glad we didn't. Then we just came back out of the woods, and we went to school that day. Of course, we told everybody what we'd seen. I told my mom and dad, and that night the neighbor came down, and he wanted to know more about it. But that's that story if you wanted to hear it. That's it.
Wow.
Now
Dave,
there?
Yeah, Dave. So
Yeah,
Dave,
yeah, no, I am, yeah.
hey, Dave. So when somebody, like, let's say, like you were talking about the place up by St. Petersburg, but let's say that that somebody from that area has a sighting and they contact you. Do you go out and just investigate the area where they reported that?
A lot of times it's on private property. I mean, you're looking off the interstate, you're looking at the cattle gates and stuff. If it's a state park or something like that where I can get easy access, but if I got to track down the landowner and get permission to go on the property, I sometimes I just pass on it because it's so much. A lot of it's owned by corporations, and that's why I'm really blessed to be in so good with the Seminole tribe. And early in my research, I had a real problem with the cattle ranches north of the preserve, up into Kissimmee. But now, if I go and it's a family-owned ranch where I can talk to the owners, they're more than happy to let me on it. So I have access to lots and lots of land here in Florida, all the way up into Mayaca. There's a lot of big hunting leases where they're happy to see me when I get there. And I'm so blessed because it's been a long road to get the notoriety for the skunk ape that allows me to have that access. I'm just real grateful for it.
Right. Oh, also, I was going to ask too, because with other Bigfoots in other areas, there are a lot of vocalizations that people report. Do these skunk apes, do they vocalize at all, like loud screams that people report?
The only sounds that I've ever heard in the Everglades that I couldn't identify and I associated to be skunk apes was different than what most people would expect. It was like a cooing sound, kind of like like that. And those are the sounds that I hear, like kind of like a Barry White dove call, like like that. And so we're just, for instance, so I'm filming today with who, and we're doing this and that, and they're like, what kind of sounds do they make? And so I told them, and then I had this Bigfoot, like a Bigfoot, look like a duck call. You blow on it and it makes some stupid sound. I said, here, just blow on this, and I gave it to them, and they're up in the tree getting filmed like they're trying to call skunk ape blowing on the damn thing. But like I said, that's television. I would never do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, people are always doing that. It looks good. Looks good on camera. Oh, man. But no, beating on trees, I would never beat on a tree. I would never throw rocks. I would never holler. I would never play. I had a guy come to me the night, and he was telling me that this Bigfoot went crazy up north because there were some people camping, and they were playing AC/DC music. I'm thinking, what, you got something against rock and roll? Or, I mean, I just don't get that kind of stuff. I just would never, nothing's going to come to that.
Yeah.
Every wildlife spooks when you do stuff like that.
Yeah. Hey, so, go ahead.
No, so I mean, I'm a hunter. I'm stealthy. I'm quiet. I walk softly. I use the wind. I use lighting a lot when I'm hunting. I try to keep the sun behind me, and so I can see out, and the light illuminates animals. Like deer stand out like a sore thumb if the light's right, but if the light's wrong, you can't see them for hell. I use all of that. That's what I do. I don't beat on trees and stuff. That's just not how I do my research.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. A lot of people probably don't like that, but I mean, I just never had any luck with it, so I don't do it.
Yeah.
You know what? I got to jump in real quick. I'm skeptical if they beat on trees. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
I don't know. I know all I can say, just to keep the peace in the Bigfoot community, all I can say is I don't know about the Bigfoot. I haven't been to the Pacific Northwest or to where that kind of stuff occurs. So maybe there's something to it. But here in the Everglades, if you beat on a tree, you're going to run everything off. At least the animals that I've been studying, I feel would run off. And the last thing I would want to do is...
Yeah, I think you're going to run... I think you're going to run things off pretty much anywhere. Hey, quick question. You've heard a lot of stories. Have you heard any that you think are kind of funny, a little bit humorous, that you'd like to share with us?
I get this guy. He walks in my shop, and he says, "I just met your buddy." And I said, "Who'd that be?" He said, "Your buddy down the road." I said, "What buddy?" He said, "Well, I was coming down the road," and he said, in the middle of the road, there's a guy. They said there's a Bigfoot in the road. He said, "I saw a Bigfoot, and it walked off in the bushes. So I pulled off the road." He said, and I walked out in there, and he said there was a little, like one of those four-wheeler tracks, like a quad runner, had drove off the side of the road, was parked behind some trees. And he said when he got back there was a guy sitting on one of those four-wheelers in a gorilla suit, and he had his head off. He had pulled the mask off of his head, and he was drinking a beer. And the guy says, "What the hell are you doing to him?" He says, "Well, Dave's my buddy down there, and I just figured I'd get him some business today, so I'm just out here doing this." He said, "Well, you're crazy as hell. Somebody's going to shoot you." He said, "Oh, I don't care. I'm getting old anyhow." And so I went down there looking, and I saw where he had parked and all, but I never found out who it was. But that was funny. I was going to go down there and say, "You need to stop this." But I never met the guy. I don't know who it was. But that was funny.
That is definitely, that's a good one for sure.
Yeah. Look, everybody's got fans. What can I say?
Yeah, and you got to admit, that is not a wise thing to do.
Oh, hell no. Not down here. And that's another thing. When my sightings, like in the 90s, there was no law here. This is the end of the road. I live at the bottom of the hill. There's no law here. The law only really came around here starting in about 1990. But everybody carried guns. People shot all the time. I had to put a brim in front of my house. I was afraid somebody on the highway was going to put a bullet through it, by accident. So, yeah, it is dangerous. And I that's not recommended, especially down here in the Everglades, to run around in a gorilla suit. You could get shot. So,
hey, quick question.
What's
your favorite encounter story?
My favorite encounter story is one that I really don't include on my resume because I never actually saw the animals, but I know what was there. Is I was in a saw palmetto thicket, and it was during the season when they have berries on it. And they get a lot of berries, and they're pretty valuable. So there were a lot of migrant workers. They sneak them in vans and stuff, in early morning before light. And they go into the forest and they pick berries and stack them by the roads, and then they pick them up at night. And it's kind of clandestine thing they do. But the park's cracked down on it. So I went way off base. I went way out. I was about 14 miles off of the main highway, and I was in a saw palmetto patch that probably covered maybe 20,000 acres. It was huge. And I figured it would be a good spot, a good food source, and it was in an area where there had been some recent sightings. So I was just kind of breezing through it with the wind in my face and the light in my favor, moving slowly. And I saw the bushes rustling ahead of me, and that's when I started catching a real strong odor of a skunk ape. And so I just kind of held back and watched, and I could just see the palmettos moving. And then I noticed to the left of where I was seeing them moving, I saw another something moving, and there was probably 3 or 4 animals in there. And I saw the back of one's head. It might have been a bear that stood up, and I caught the back of its head. But generally, when a bear stands up, and this is crazy now, if he's profiling you, you see that Roman nose. So that's a dead giveaway. But if he's got his back of his head and stands up, the ears are very apparent. Although the bear's ears are small, on the head when they stand up from the back, there it looks like Mickey Mouse. It's ridiculous. It didn't have that. I saw that, and it didn't have it. And I wanted to say I saw a skunk ape so bad, but I'm just not sure. But I think I came up on a small group of skunk apes that were foraging in these palmettos. So that's probably the nicest, I've ever had as far as an experience goes. Unfortunately, the ground was too dry. I couldn't pick up any tracks. I didn't get a good enough view to really say that it was skunk apes, but I believe it was in my heart.
It sounds like it was. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an interesting story. That is really a cool story.
It was.
One thing I do want to do is I would like people to find your website. I think I'm on it, but if you could tell everybody how can they find your website?
Well, my place is called Skunk Ape Research Headquarters, and you can Google it. My website is skunkape.info, not skunkape.com. It's skunkape.info. And there's some good information on there. And I don't know how you can find it, but if you want to watch a fun movie, I did a real fun movie a long time ago with a friend of mine. It's called The Ochopee Skunk Ape, and it's online now, and I'm getting a lot of visitors into my shop who enjoyed watching it. So it's called The Ochopee Skunk Ape, and it was done quick and by a friend, but it's kind of fun to watch. I don't know.
Well, we'll definitely keep an eye out for it. And I want to tell folks, I'm on your website right now, and you've got a lot of good stuff on here. You got a gift shop, you got tours, zoo, camping, and so, yeah. So a lot of really good stuff here, and contact information. At the end of the show, what I'd like to do is see if we could we use one of the images on here with your picture on it to use for this episode to kind of promote you and promote your shop a little bit.
You use whatever you want, guys. You got my permission. Use whatever you want. It's fine with me. Anything you see of my picture on, you can have it.
Dave, I got to
say, there's one here that we're going to use.
I got to say, Dave, I have got a bit of a bug. That's why I haven't been talking. But I thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. Really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I get fired up on a lot of issues too, and I'm glad I didn't on your show. But I mean, I am well versed in South Florida as a whole in all of the environmental issues. So maybe sometime we'll talk about that.
You bet. And we got to definitely have you back. You're a really interesting guy, so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. It's been nice talking with y'all.
Hey, Dave, I have one final question, though. Because you mentioned the unsolved mysteries. Is there any way that I can find that? Because I've actually looked, because I used to watch that show a lot, and I still love that show. And I could still find old episodes on YouTube, but I looked one time for if they ever did a show on Bigfoot, and I couldn't find one. Is there a way that, do you know any way that me and other people could find that episode?
I don't know. They still show it all the time, and they show it on that show where they do the unsolved murders and all of that. I don't know what that channel's called, but they still run unsolved mysteries on it. It's the Mr. Murder Mystery channel, the lab work or whatever. That's all them different things. But so I don't really know. I can tell you this, that Unsolved Mysteries was bought by another company called Cosgrove Entertainment. And they pulled Robert Stack talking out of it and put a new guy in. But it's the same story and the same words.
Okay.
And it's the same thing, Unsolved Mysteries. But it's Cosgrove Entertainment.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thanks a lot for coming out. Yeah, we'll definitely have to have you on again.
Yeah, I'd love to be. And anything going on here in South Florida, I'm right in the middle of the python thing. I own the second largest python in captivity in the entire world. I wasn't on I think I'll be on Discovery this coming Tuesday night on Guardians of the Glades at 10 o'clock next Tuesday. And you will see my shop, and I'm behind the scenes in all of the Guardians of the Glades episodes. As a matter of fact, Dusty was trying to call me right when I went on with y'all. He's the star of it, but that's a neat show about the Glades.
Okay.
Yeah.
Check it out.
Yeah, it's super, And you see anything here in the Glades, anteaters, hyenas, emus, there's all kinds of stuff running around here. It's crazy. All right.
So you have a lot of invasive species running around in the Glades, right?
Sure, and not only running around, swimming around. The water is loaded with exotic species. Peacock bass, walking catfish, you name it, it's there. And the native fish, believe it or not, are holding their own. And so, the Everglades, as bad as it sounds, there's a lot of fish. If you like to fish, woo! Boy, the Everglades is the place to fish. You can catch anything. They're the best fishing in the world here.
Okay, fellas, we're out of time. Dave, thank you so much. And folks...
Okay, you're welcome.
Folks, stay tuned for the second segment. Welcome back from the break, everyone. Dave was a real treat to listen to, wasn't he, guys?
Yes.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, we're going to have him on again.
Absolutely.
For sure. Yeah.
I understand we have plenty of questions from listeners.
Yes.
Alrighty, well, let's go ahead and dive right into those questions then.
All right. I'll go ahead and start off here. We got Chris, and good question. He says, one thing I've never heard is what kind of strength do these creatures possess? And, this is a question we've asked ourselves on the show. He says, I've listened to the episode where the bicycle was thrown into the tree while chasing a young boy. He says, just for kicks. So maybe you could answer, whether it was for kicks or retaliation. Or he says, I like this guy. He's tried it myself. And so he says, it can be done by an average-sized guy like myself. I'm not sure how you throw a bike 15 feet in the air, but anyway, that's his question. So,
well, there was two parts to that actually. The kid wasn't running from the creature, not yet. What happened was he was riding home late. There weren't too many lights on that road. He felt like he was being followed, so he stopped at the next street light. And when he stopped, presumably he was standing, because you're not balancing, and turned around and looked, and the creature was there sitting, actually. Then when he went to take off, the creature grabbed the bike. The kid went over the handlebars. He got up and he ran. When they found the bike, the deputy sheriff took him back there. The bike wasn't only up in the tree, but the frame was bent. So you might be able to throw the bike in the air, but bending that frame, that's going to be a little bit more of a task. So in regards to strength, we can't measure the strength unless we were able to actually measure the amount of strength or pressure it would take to bend not just a bicycle frame, but we talked about the broken trees and things also, or the twisting.
Do we wasn't it how high was the bike up on the tree?
It was between 10 and 15 feet.
Okay.
So you depending on the bike, you probably could throw it up there. Whether it would stick or not, that's another story. But bending the frame on top of that, and then the deputy found blood on the frame, which he collected, and they took it in. So it was more than just the bike being thrown up there, the frame bent. He collected blood that was an official chain of custody situation. It was sent in to one of their crime labs in the region. Took a year to come back. The sheriff wasn't happy because it cost him $40,000, and it was unknown primate.
Yeah. So hang on just a second. I want to follow up on that. So I would hope, and I think we talked to John, our anthropologist, about this. I would hope that the results of that would get stored into a database somewhere to be compared, kind of a baseline for future samples.
More than likely not, though.
Yeah, that's what he said. More than likely not. Too bad. Okay.
Well, and then again, it wouldn't be much value because you don't have a known sample to compare it by. All you could do is compare another sample to that one, and two unknowns don't make a positive. So.
Okay. Gotcha.
No, so Will, I was just going to ask. So they never kept that. There's no sample of that still.
Probably not. No. If there was nothing, for a crime lab to follow up on, there would be no reason to keep it. And I'm pretty sure they just discard those things if there's nothing. And in that case, especially since the sheriff wasn't happy that, instead of the inexpensive test to see if they can run it through their system, see if it's somebody, that was known to them. I'm sure there was no follow-up at all on that.
Okay.
I can hear our audience out there screaming, clamoring, "Hey, this is important stuff." And actually, if it comes back as an unknown primate, I would think that even that in and of itself could be significant. I mean, that's important, right? It didn't come back as a chimp, orangutan, squirrel monkey, which, couldn't do that anyway, or some sort of something that is known to science. Mm-hmm. So.
But what do you pin it on?
Well, you don't pin it on anything, but you just come back and say, wow, we don't know what it is.
I mean, it does support the situation not being a person doing it.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. I guess there's a part of me that really wants to see a DNA sample where of course, I think this is maybe far, 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 far down the road, but I want to see a DNA sample where they've caught one of these creatures and, it's been, maybe they found it dead on the road or shot or whatever. Mm-hmm. And they say, we took a sample from it and here's what we found.
Yeah, that's what you'd have to have is a known sample cataloged to run unknown samples comparing them to.
Yeah. And I think that's not in the immediate future.
No, it's not.
For a wide variety of reasons.
For a wide variety of reasons.
Hey, Will, I wanted to ask you kind of to, I guess, switch gears a little bit, but just in terms of Renee and John Green, in all of their efforts, what do you think that their biggest regret might be, or their biggest mistake may have been in trying to find evidence with this creature?
Well, Green and Dehennon differed a little bit in their opinions, but excuse me, I think the biggest regret was probably focusing primarily on getting the scientific community interested. They could have done that and also continued, after Patterson got his film, pursuing the creatures in that area and elsewhere. They did to a limited extent, but not as great as prior to that time. So, and that was my biggest question with Dehennon, was why didn't you guys go back? He said, we thought we had what we needed. And it didn't materialize. So, in my opinion, they should have kept going in that area and maybe continued getting as good a proof as Patterson got and more. So, that's probably, the biggest regrets that they had.
Yeah, so you think that probably in that area they could have gotten a lot more evidence than what they ended up doing.
I think they could have, sure.
Yeah.
You strike while iron is hot, so to speak.
Yeah. And prior to that time, were there a lot of reports in the Bluff Creek area, or was that kind of like mostly like Washington State at that time, or Oregon, or?
Well, in the late 50s is when they really started punching roads in there. So there had been things, when I talked to Al Hodgson years ago, he said they, when his family moved to that Willow Creek area in 1924, the locals already knew about these things. They just called them the big apes. It wasn't really something. No, they weren't. Excuse me. They weren't going out looking after them, and they heard the screams, and that's what they talked about. So they were known in the area. There were reports, at least from the early 50s, and of course, once the late 50s hit, Jerry Crew, for that solid decade after that, there were, every couple of years there was a lot of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It feels like these things have been around for, they've been around for a long time, but I mean, the locals have known of their existence for a long time. But it wasn't until post-World War II, I think, is when, we had greater media coverage. We had television, and we had, I think probably syndicated newspapers and that sort of thing, that this really became a widespread topic. I don't know, can you comment on that? Kind of a broad question, but...
Yeah, I mean, up until the 1950s when, President Eisenhower, I can't remember the term, or the name of the act, but when they determined to build, there weren't even highways that intersected the East Coast to the West Coast. In the middle of the country, there were a lot of these rural roads, so they, created the interstate system, highway system, something we take for granted today that we're all connected. Back then it wasn't. So prior to that time, there was a lot of disconnect with communities and such. So, and the same thing up to World War II, everybody kind of was in the mode of, day-to-day survival and like they had been for decades. So we didn't have all the leisure time. And after World War II, a lot of those veterans, I think came to the determination that, we lived through, excuse me, geez, I'm still having a little congestion here. The leisure time came from that decision that, we lived through the Depression, we lived through World War II. It's time to take a little bit of time for us. You know what I mean? Same with, I'm sure, news items, things like that. So there was a lot of these things that proliferated after that time period. and things that weren't known previously or talked a whole bunch about started getting into the news.
Yeah.
So one of the things that has baffled me is, once, like you said, once it started getting into the news, we have syndicated. It almost seemed like the news media kind of followed seemed like there was a parallel between connecting all the communities with the interstate system and the media. You start getting greater coverage, national media and that sort of thing. I'm wondering what the resistance was to taking the topic seriously and why it wasn't investigated, at a government level and a scientific level.
Well, I think initially a lot of the articles were put in magazines like Argosy and Saga and some of those that were basically kind of tabloid-like magazines. I think we view them today differently than what they were intended for and what they were back in those times. So those articles come out, people would see the name of the magazine and think, that's junk. It's like the National Enquirer. And I kind of think early on that's how it sort of got shuffled into that realm.
Interesting. And what's funny is you look at some of the articles in Argosy. You look at the Argosy magazine, what was called tabloid then, and we've taken tabloid to a whole new level here in the late 20th and 21st century. It's I guess what I'm trying to say, that those old articles, some of them actually look quite serious.
And what's interesting, Tommy and I, before recording, we were kind of texting back and forth about the article that came out in Argosy magazine in February 1968, and that was about Patterson and the filming. And it was written by Ivan Sanderson. And Ivan Sanderson was a zoologist, he was a science writer. He wasn't, somebody just out making stories up. He did a really good job in that article. And there were, John Napier, who was also an anthropologist from England, and some other professional folks that, wrote or commented on that. So it wasn't something that really should have been in a tabloid type publication, but that's where it ended up.
So it seems like, I guess what I'm wondering is, I'm just wondering what it would take because we've got a barrier now, quite frankly. There's been a lot of denial of the topic, and we don't really have an answer for it, but I would like to see that barrier kind of come down at some point and have the topic brought back and taken seriously again.
Well, unfortunately, it's going to be, it's somewhat of I wouldn't say an unsurmountable task, but it's going to require a lot of proof to be able to bring it back to square one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I bet. I'm going to move on here. I've got a question from one of our all-time favorites. This is Fred in Okinawa and his students. So shout out to Fred. Fred says, all right, he makes a comment here. He says, well, karma bit me for joking about our 70s weather in the last email. We got down to the high 50s. Brr. It's all right, Fred. You come to Oregon and the East Coast. It's Northeast. It's very chilly. We do pay for it in our brutal summers, though. Okay, so here's some questions from his class. Okay, Ava has a few questions. She wants to know how many Bigfoot or Sasquatch are in America, how many Sasquatch-like creatures are in the world, and what seasons are most important in the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to rephrase a little bit. In the Pacific Northwest, what season do you get the most reports for Bigfoot?
Okay, well, we'll do them one at a time. First of all, Fred, how are you doing, buddy? I really enjoy, your questions and from your students, and a big shout out to your class. So what was the first question? Let's start with that one.
Okay, yeah. How many Sasquatch are in America?
Well, I was told through my sources that in the 1950s, when they first started really looking at this, that the estimate was around 50,000, and we're talking that's all of North America. So today it's at least double that, probably more.
Okay. Ava's second part of that question is, how many Sasquatch-like creatures are in the world?
Well, worldwide, it looks like the same as here. There are two main kinds, and that could change, with final discovery and a lot of study on them. But there's some major features that sort of divide the two types. One being, one version has teeth very similar to ours. The other ones have very pronounced canines, uppers and lowers. So that's kind of a major physical separation, and the feet show some differences too. So two main varieties that are probably obviously related, but there's some division somewhere in their biological history. But all over the place, you get slight variations. So what I was told, at least on this continent, that there were around 20 variations that are somewhat different, and that's because the breeding pools aren't all mixed. They're separated by topographical features.
And I'm going to ask another question. I'm going to kind of dovetail into Ava's question. There was a chimp discovered, I think it was in the 90s, and I think it was in Africa, and I don't remember the name. It was either the billy ape or the bonobo, but I believe it stands about 6 feet tall. It walks upright and has some other characteristics, like I guess they sleep on the ground, which other chimps don't, because they don't want to be lion fodder.
Right.
But the lions are, no way are they going to mess with these things.
They're kind of afraid of them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So do you think this thing could be some sort of an African version of a, their type of Bigfoot?
It could be, or a distant relative. I mean, we don't know. We don't know, but it's possible, sure.
Okay.
That's something we'd have to ask John, our anthropologist, about.
It just kind of fascinated me that there is at least, and the things are like 6 feet tall. So they're, as far as chimps go, it's huge. It's a large creature. And
there was supposed to be a type of creature like this, in Africa.
Okay.
I mean, these creatures are literally all over the world, so.
Hey, Will, let me just ask you too, because I think that Ava has a really, really great question. Do you think that these things are populating at a higher rate than other animals in that area? Because that could make a huge difference in terms of, sightings and things like that.
Yeah, the population does appear to be growing.
Compared to other animals in that
I don't know
area?
about compared, because there's just, especially, the food chain kind of starts with plant life, and because of the proliferation of leafy plants in logged areas, that causes the herbivore population to grow, and then also the predator population, which these things are, to correspondingly grow. So you get across the board growth.
Yeah.
Brian, that's a great question, because you think about that, and for the statisticians out there and the mathematical people, that's an interesting question, because you think about it, you're looking at ratios between Bigfoot populations, and you're talking about North America now, Bigfoot populations, and you could go on forever calculating ratios between prey animals, so what they consider to be prey animals, which is basically anything, I would imagine, and these creatures. And it does feel like sightings, and it's more common. The sightings seem to be, or more and more frequent, as well as the evidence and even the encounters.
Well, there's another factor in that also. Our behavior is a big factor in that because we do less things, negatively towards wildlife. We're lazier now than we ever have been in our history of our species. Excuse me.
Yeah, I was going to say, speak for yourself.
Well, no, I mean, literally when people are doing things, everybody's got to have pets and all these things. We just leave stuff sitting out. And I'm speaking about food items. Pets themselves are a food item and also their food. So with things that are easily obtainable by wild creatures, meaning these creatures and other animals, because you always hear people, talk about there's always raccoons and all kinds of things in your yard. We have them here. They seem to like the storm drains to hang out in, which is close to everybody's homes. But there's dog food, cat food, all kinds of things out and available. So, or like even in my yard, we have plenty of fruit trees. So there's an abundance of food sources, and lots of people have these things everywhere. And we hear lots of stories of these things coming around where food's available. So, and that means near closer to population. So that's a big factor also.
Yeah,
that's it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was just going to jump in real quick. I was going to say, do you think they're becoming, because it seems like the other animals, like you said, the raccoons and everything else, are becoming sort of acclimated to people. They're not being shot at as much,
Well, look at what coyotes are doing. There's lots of complaints about coyotes coming into urban areas.
And they're eating people's pets.
Children and stuff, and their pets.
And kids, So
I was just going to say that's a great question from Ava. Yeah, that's a great question because, as Will said, like these things, just like other wild animals, they will come up and they will eat, trash and whatever is available for them.
Sure, they're opportunists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talk about, we're kind of becoming lazy and our behavior is changing. We're not quite the...
We're not aggressive like we used to be.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. So the question I have is, do you think these creatures respond in a negative way towards aggression? In other words, if somebody takes a shot at one of these things, do you think that they could retaliate or could it modify their behavior in a very negative way towards the next group of humans?
We have reports of that kind of stuff. So folks, you don't want to just take a pot shot at one. It's going to be a very negative response.
Yeah, and it may not be negative. You may take a pot shot, maybe from your vehicle or something, drive off or whatever. I'm just speaking hypothetically.
Right.
But unfortunately, you're setting the stage for the next people who have an encounter with these things.
Yeah, and they've already got a somewhat short temper anyway. So, don't set yourself up or somebody else to be in a paper bag as lunch.
Yeah. Well, this dovetails a little bit. Okay, so now we've got Jaslyn. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Jaslyn asks, is it possible to kill a Sasquatch with a VMP? Oh, and then she goes on to explain, this is a machine gun from a video game from Black Ops 3. All right, Jaslyn, way to go. This has a very high rate of fire. It can hold 56 rounds and is great for close combat. Note, I couldn't find info on the caliber, but it's a medium-strength weapon in the game. Good question, Jaslyn.
Well, I don't know about weaponry from games, but, there are things, I'm sure, that are quite capable of taking one down if one were going to use such things.
I'll interject, Jaslyn. I'll say, what do you think about a 7.62 Vulcan, General Electric Vulcan minigun?
Well,
probably
again,
would do the trick.
There again, I mean, it just depends, on what you're using and the application and situation and all that stuff.
It's not very practical, but I think they have about a 3,000 round per minute rate of fire. So yeah, it would probably turn one of these things into chop suey and turn the forest into a salad.
I was thinking the Vulcan, that was an air defense weapon years ago when I was in the Army, and that was a 20 millimeter round. That was
okay.
much larger than 7.62. If you're going to shoot at aircraft, you use big bullets, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, we could go on and on, but a 20 millimeter, one of those would take care of this thing.
Yeah, probably.
Okay. Well, Genesis in Fred's class wants to know how tall can a Sasquatch grow, and how long do they live? And his follow-up question is, what should someone do if they encounter a Sasquatch close up? Good questions.
Well, we have a few reports, and I don't know how legitimate they are, because unless you've got a fixed object to compare the creature to, if it's standing next to something you know the exact height of, but there have been reports of people saying up to 14 feet, which is it's probably less than that. My guess is probably the upward limit could be 10 feet, maybe a little bit more. But again, unless you get a fixed object to compare them to, and there are exceptions. Just like in our population, we get people that are, on the average between 5 and 6 feet tall. But we get folks that can grow up to 8+ feet. So in their population, there are probably some exceptions too. As far as how long they live, we don't know. Somewhere between 40 and 60 years is likely, but it's unknown yet. And
you think about it. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask if there was another part to that question.
No. Actually, Will, I heard the same thing too with other primates. Yeah, like 40 to 60 years, probably. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of average for large primates, depending on their living conditions and all that. So.
Yeah.
You try to visualize something that is 10, 11, let's say 12 feet, based on, and I think there's a formula for the size of the footprint. You take the size of the footprint in inches.
Length.
Yeah, length of it in inches times 6.6, and divide that by 12. So let's say 11 foot. So you look out your window and just try to imagine something that's 11 foot, walking around out there. 7 feet is enormous. 7.5 feet would be enormous. Add a few feet onto that, and it'd be terrifying.
Well, and let's see. I was trying to see. Okay. The big gray one that we saw in 1988 in the Washougal River, it was enormous. I found footprints a few different times of that when they were 18 inches long. And on that calculation, you get 9 feet, 9 inches. I think I guessed around between 9 and 10 feet, so I had a pretty good guess on that one. It would be easy to say, geez, it looked like it was 12 feet tall, because it did give that appearance. So sometimes, especially if you're not a good gauge of height or weight, it's really easy to, go to whatever number looks appropriate to you. So some of these sightings could, where they say, well, it was 14 feet tall. Yeah, it was probably closer to 10 feet.
Yeah.
Kind of like fishing stories.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not to say anything negative against the people, stating that, but
right.
It's just a matter of fact.
Yeah, and that brings up another question. In my mind, I tend to categorize age and size of these things as, if they're black, if the hair is black, that they're younger, much younger, maybe smaller, 6 feet and under. The hair starts to get red, and people have described, a very bright red. And then gray are the ones that are just absolutely immense. Would you kind of agree with that? Or?
Well, and the gray ones, there really aren't, and when you look at population-wise, aren't that big a number of them. So age doesn't equate the gray hair. Like with gorillas do to a point, but you don't get a group of gorillas that are full of silverbacks. So
you're saying that gray does not equate to age?
Not necessarily, because we have these large ones that are, dark brown, and again, lots of people report brown and black, but up until recent times, most people, 70+%, were reporting the reddish brown color.
Regardless of size?
Right, regardless of size.
Okay. Okay.
Except for the young ones. The real young ones are almost always jet black.
Yeah. So Will, here is kind of a good segue to the next question that I have. Are there any differences between like a female vocalizing versus a male vocalizing? Are their motivations different, or I mean, have you heard like different accounts?
Totally unknown. And as far as we know, there aren't any differences. Not that you'd have to actually watch the individuals vocalizing to make that kind of a distinction, if there was one. We hear vocalizations. There's no way of knowing if it's a male or female, juvenile or an adult or otherwise. You'd have to have direct observation of something like that.
Okay, but like, what are your thoughts, though? I mean, do you think that it could be different between the male and female, or?
I wouldn't think so. The alphas might have a little bit more in their toolbox, but for the most part, when you hear vocals, they're probably not much difference between males and females, if any.
Okay.
I want to go back to Genesis, to his second question that he has, which is, it's a real good question from a safety standpoint, and that is, what kind of a posture or what should somebody do if they encounter a Sasquatch close up?
At this point, I would treat it like a bear. Don't mess with it. Don't provoke it. If you can, get yourself away from it.
Okay, and I think what he's saying is, if you just happen to stumble onto one, or you're standing there, let's say hypothetically, you're standing there and one bluff charges you, you don't know if it's going to be a bluff charge or not. What would, if you have the wherewithal, I think most people just freeze, but if you have the wherewithal to take action.
Yeah, like most creatures in the wild, you don't want to run from them, because if they're chasing you, that's sort of a thing that they're geared for, like a big cat, and you can relate to a house cat. When they're chasing something, that's they're kind of in their hunting mode in their mind. So, and with primates, you want to stand your ground. You're not going to outrun them. That's just not ever going to happen. So you're better off just standing your ground and calling the bluff. And almost always they'll break off. That's usually a challenge of some type. So, if you stand your ground, they're not gonna grab you or anything.
What about the? I've heard it mentioned, don't look them in the eyes, because they could interpret that as a threat. I've
read that, and it's from native folks usually say that, and I don't know. My own encounters, the only one I can speak from is, and I looked directly at the one that was standing in front of me, and it stared back, and there wasn't any negative consequences of that.
Now I'm curious. You saw its eyes, right?
It was, yeah, I did. I mean, it was getting dark, so I didn't get a lot of detail, but I could look right at it. It was looking back.
It was looking at you. Okay. Yeah. Could you detect like intelligence? And I'm just.
It was only a few brief moments, and I wasn't taking stock of anything except, I wasn't even thinking about my underwear needing changing. I was thinking about how the hell do I get out of this?
Well, Will, and Tom, great question, because I actually did a little bit of research, and I found that if you look at a chimpanzee's brain, And orangutan too. Their brains are only about 1/3 the size of humans. And I mean, I guess this is kind of a question for you, Will. How smart are they? Because if a chimp's brain is only 1/3 the size of our brains.
Now, is that the ratio, or is that because they're a smaller creature than us, or is that in relationship to the cranial size?
This is from I think the Smithsonian. It just says that chimps' brains and orangutan brains are about 1/3 the size of humans. So I don't know what that entails.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, let me say this. Brain size doesn't always equate into survivability. You know what I mean? The bigger the brain doesn't mean you're going to survive. Neanderthals had a brain cavity around 200 cc's larger than ours, but they went extinct and we're still here. As far as, the Sasquatch brain size, we don't know. They are highly intelligent. All primates are highly intelligent regardless of that brain size difference. So, what that makes them in terms of behavior and everything is yet to be determined, but they are highly intelligent.
Yeah.
I'd love to get if he's available sometime, get John back on the show, because we talked a little bit about the limbic system, the amygdala. I have a hard time pronouncing that. In the limbic system, and he thought that possibly they have an enlarged amygdala, which would make them more of a fight or flee, more emotional type of creature.
And the aggressive behavior that we see in the vindictive behavior could be directly correlated to that.
Oh,
so
interesting.
I'll see if we can get him on for next week's Q&A.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Hey, Will, here's another question too, about their hunting skills. Do they actually smell deer urine? Because the reason why I ask is because apparently chimps in the wild are able to smell leopard urine, and I guess that leopards hunt them, so they are able to kind of get away if they smell that. And I'm just wondering if Bigfoot, if they can smell kind of like deer urine, and they know that it's a good hunting opportunity for them.
Well, you get a couple of things going there. Number one, you're talking about predators versus herbivores. So predators often use their urine and feces to mark territory, and I think it's going to be a little bit more pungent than an animal that's trying to stay away from predator animals. So they probably can smell different things. I doubt it, because they have a flat nose, much flatter than ours, and there probably aren't as many. Their sense of smell is probably not a huge amount different than ours. In other words, you can't detect very low amount of particles of whatever scent, but you can identify a large number of things, distinguish one thing from another. So, the comparison with a dog, people always say how much, and we've talked about this, how much better a dog's sense of smell is than ours, which is true because they have that long snout and they have a lot of sensory nerve sensors along the pathway of that air coming in, so they can pick up very minute particles, but they can't identify that many of them, whereas our sense of smell, we can identify 50+ thousand scents and clearly distinguish them from one another, where a dog can't do that. So it depends on your brain.
Right.
That's interesting, because I was just thinking about, if you were to compare the ability, the olfactory ability of a chimp versus a baboon. Baboon's got the kind of a dog snout.
They can smell.
And I just, and so I wonder, I'm just curious if how that would apply to type 3s.
So, it could be, sure. So larger primates are going to be more, number one is going to be visual abilities, and then hearing.
So that makes sense. And here's the thing. These creatures, we've talked to eyewitnesses that their eyes are immense. They're huge.
Yes, very large.
And I'm thinking about, a conversation I had with one of our guys, Lee, when he had his very close encounter. And he said the eyes are absolutely huge. But he was talking about, he was also using a night vision. It was only a Gen 2 night vision, but it had a very, very large objective lens. Now, where I'm going with this is because these creatures have such enormous eyes. Again, it's speculation, but I'm guessing they would have more rods and cones.
Mm-hmm.
And they would also probably have very, very clear night vision.
Well,
any thoughts on that?
Yeah, they're probably a hominid like we are, so the eyes are going to be similar to ours. And after dark, you don't get that clear of vision. What you get is better detection of movement with the rods. So, and there's cases like, and I'll use the good one, the interesting one I always like was the Bob Titmus story a few years before Patterson got his film in that same area. And the creature knew he was there, but it couldn't find him. So apparently it could smell a little bit because he heard the sniffing, but it was unable to locate him. Now, if they had really good night vision, it would have been able to find him, but it couldn't. So that kind of is a good indicator that, like our vision, we don't really see that well in the dark. You can see to an extent, especially, I know from my job in the military was, working mostly at night, and you give yourself time before going out on a patrol, about 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust to the dark. And even then, what you picked up more than anything was movement from your peripheral vision. So since he kind of covered himself up all but his face in the ground, it was unable to locate him.
Right. Hey, Will, if you had to guess, what percentage would you say of these creatures are nocturnal versus not nocturnal?
Well, I don't think they're, like I was just saying, about the visual abilities, I don't think they're truly nocturnal, because that would mean they were functioning almost exclusively at night. And we know that they're equally capable of doing things at night and daytime, because they're not sleeping 8 hours like we do. And they will hunt at least a couple times during the day, or during a 24-hour cycle. One time as an individual, the next time as a group. So... yeah, they're not nocturnal. They're diurnal is the term, which means they can operate equally both day and night.
Yeah. Hey, what time of day was the Patterson film taken?
It was around 1 p.m.
Okay.
It was the middle of the day.
That's actually a really good question. That's interesting. And when you're explaining about their diurnal abilities, I was just thinking in terms of, a lot of people report seeing activity, whether it's vocal or, having a sighting in the twilight hours. And I think that would simply correspond to when the deer are starting to wake up.
Ask yourself, why would they be more active plus or minus an hour of sunset and sunrise? It's because that's when the game animals are on the move.
And that would totally make sense.
So now if you're an ambush predator, all you're doing is sitting near their game trails and you're waiting. You're listening. And you see the movement.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Will. Here's another question. What do you think is the biggest killer of these animals? I mean, is it like a cancer? Is it kind of a disease, or like what would you say is the biggest killer of these animals?
That's a total unknown. There's just no information on anything like that. If I were to say, it would probably be disease or old age.
Yeah.
I mean, not much different than humans in the wild.
Yeah.
Interesting question. And the one kind of dovetail into that, I've often wondered, do these things encounter, one of the things that I find annoying, very annoying in the woods, especially in spring and early summer, are the plethora of mosquitoes, but also you can wander along and stumble into a yellow jacket's nest, and then you get this yellow fog that comes out of the ground. I just wonder if these things ever have to deal with that. And
I don't think so, because their hair is pretty thick. You know, it'd be like a bear somewhat. You know, with all that thick hair, those bugs aren't going to get into that. And I know from the one I saw up close, from what I could see. Now there was, not specific details, but I could tell the face was covered with hair except around the eyes and the nose. So, I really doubt there's going to be any insect penetration of that hair.
Yeah. Hey, so Will, do you think that the most of them, do they climb trees, or do you think that maybe only juveniles do, or just out of curiosity, like what do you think? Do adults climb trees?
Depending on their weight and everything, it's possible. I mean, just depends on the tree and what they would want to climb the tree for. Most of the reports we get are younger ones.
Yeah.
That's a good question, though, Brian, because if they do climb trees, and let's say you're in a forested area where there are trees that can accommodate their weight, big trees, big Sasquatch, then do you think it would be maybe beneficial to, if you're looking 360 degrees, to look up as well? Just a thought.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it really depends on the area you're in, and a lot of the trees, especially fir trees, really aren't set up for a creature with a lot of weight to be climbing. I mean, I don't see the advantage, really, because if you're, except for you're young and you're playing, you might do it, but the adults probably not.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to move on. I've got a question from Carly. Carly wants to know, are there any, this is a good question, Carly. Are there any reported friendly encounters between a Sasquatch and human that you believe are true? And I was actually going to ask that question. Once in a while go ahead.
I've never heard of any. There have been 9 encounters, but I don't know, not friendly ones.
Okay, because I've heard the ones where people talk about, it returned a child or it saved a child from being eaten by a mountain lion, that sort of thing. And
I don't know if that's so much a friendly encounter. It might be just a maternalistic kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Because there have been other species that have done similar kinds of things, but it's relatively rare.
Yeah.
Other species, you mean like other primates or?
Oh, the other animals that have acted. I mean, you always hear the stories about, and I don't know how true they are of feral people being supposedly raised by other species of animals.
Okay.
I don't know how. I really doubt some of those are legitimate, but
yeah, right.
Because in the wild, especially with predators, what they go after are the young and the old, the vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
But from one primate species to another, it's a rare possibility, but it would be very rare.
Yeah. We don't want to test that theory.
No, it's not something you want to go out and try out. Send the kids out to play in the woods.
Yeah, where the Bigfoot are.
Yeah, right.
See if any of them come back. Fred wants to introduce Mrs. Kelly Rice. It's his co-teacher. He says, we have a combined class of 48 students. You guys are busy. That's a big class for 2 teachers. She's one of the best teachers I've ever worked with. She's a skeptic, but she's open to the existence of Sasquatch if hard evidence is provided. She calls my Sasquatch Info Center the Sasquatch Shrine. So a shout out to Kelly Rice.
Hello, Kelly. Well, skeptics are good. It makes us more honest in our approach.
Oh boy, and this topic needs that.
It does, big time.
Hey, well, so here's another question too. Do you think that when these groups go out and, like you've said, about a 500-mile radius, when they do go to a new area, do they have a scout that kind of will give information for them?
Well, I wouldn't say so much a scout. My Native American buddies told me that it's usually the alpha that's the first when it goes into the new feeding area.
Okay, so he would go and
that's what I was told, yes.
Okay.
And I suppose if there were any kind of threats, then he might move the group elsewhere. But it's the alpha that makes that determination.
Now, are there any areas that they would avoid, like maybe like the ocean, or just in general? Like, are there areas that they won't go to?
Not that I'm aware of. We keep getting new reports from places where I never would have thought they'd be in, but apparently they are. So it doesn't seem to bother them to go any place particular, except heavily human populated areas, and then they're probing the outside of those too for easy handouts. So
yeah.
Now, can you give an example of one of those places you just mentioned where you didn't think that they would be, but they are?
Well, in the Southwest, for example, or even Southern California, where there isn't, well, I shouldn't say there isn't forest, because you got the Angeles Mountains and there's enough covered there, but it's not a place that I would have said, hey, let's go there and look because I think Sasquatch is there, or the Southwest in a lot of places, Arizona, places like that, but they are apparently there.
Oh, interesting. Well, and
I wouldn't even say out in the high desert areas, but there are places nearby those areas where there's timber and such. Northern Arizona and for an example.
So basically, I think I would look at a couple things. Number one, is there a food source, and number two, is there some sort of concealment?
Well, yeah, and they don't necessarily live in those places. They'll travel 20 miles to a place where they might be foraging for food, but it's not the place they're normally hanging out in.
Okay, so what about the possibility that these things could be 20 miles or maybe more from, say, the periphery of the city limits, but on the very periphery you've got, maybe you've got some city parks that sort of go into some forested areas, and then ultimately those forested areas might sort of connect to a national forest. Would there be an incentive for them to do that?
If there's something there that they can benefit from, they might, sure. But you got to remember, there's got to be some kind of food or something that they want there. And if it's easier for them to do that than to hunt where they are, sure, why not? I mean, they're an opportunist.
Okay. And that's what I was thinking of in terms of some of the areas that we've heard reports of. They're kind of astonishing. They're not suburban, but they're rural areas, and you've got houses and farms, and people have ongoing encounters with these things.
Yeah, I mean, it just depends. It depends on the individuals. If they're really adverse to being around people, then those individuals aren't going to go to those places. But, some are predisposed to do that, so then that's where you get these reports.
And I guess the other question is, I'm just kind of thinking as we go, what would be their aversion to humans? Because even when we're out in the wilderness, they seem to avoid us for the most part.
Well, again,
do you have any idea?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you go back to, you have to think about, in terms of very ancient times, and the book, Them and Us, kind of gives a good example. He says, he's using an example of Neanderthals. That's what he thinks Neanderthals were, a super predator. But it's more likely these things are the super predator. So there was a point in that publication where he talks about, I think it was around 40,000 years ago, that our species was down, or maybe the time period was different, and it was 40,000. I can't remember the number of humans that they felt was left. It wasn't a huge number. that we were on the clear decline very quickly, and it was through predation. But somewhere along that line, we changed and became what we are today, which is very aggressive, very violent species, and turned the tables on the super predators. And I believe we felt that we drove them into extinction when we didn't, but we thought we did. And then over many, many generations after that time period, we simply forgot about them because we didn't think they existed anymore. So successive generations simply weren't taught about them. So that behavior is still in them, or the reaction toward us, because they know we're a very violent species. So they choose to avoid us as much as possible.
Yeah. Will, I guess I know that we're almost out of time, but this could be a kind of a tease for next week's Q&A.
Okay.
But I just want you to kind of elaborate, because I know that you've talked before about their hunting techniques,
Mm-hmm.
and specifically you said that there is a certain time period where they'll collaborate together. But then also there's a specific time period where they kind of go on their own and then hunt for themselves. Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Well, that's within a group structure. Part of the time when they hunt individually, that's to take care of their own needs, which are substantial. And then there's another part of the day that and we get plenty of reports, like with Gerald's case, where the group was hunting and came in on him. Yeah. So what they do with that could be, older or younger individuals in a group they take the food back to, but not unlike, human populations did in the past.
Mm-hmm.
One of the unnerving things about these creatures, we're talking about their average group size, maybe 4 to 6
mm-hmm.
in a group. But when groups, what Brian's talking about, where they combine, you get several groups that can combine, and you may have, I think we talked about in the past, upwards of 30 or more of these things.
And those are unique situations, and that's for something else that's going on, and it's not very long that they bond together.
Yeah, but what would be, why would they do that?
Well, I'm sure it's for perceived threats. If there's for whatever reason, I know the case you're talking about with that group, there was a group that was sent in there, and I won't elaborate too much on that, but
right.
And it was a perceived threat because there were, around 120 people, so they bonded together and they pushed the people out of there.
Right. So how, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. Okay, so when they do this, how do they communicate? How do they go up and tap some guy on the shoulder? Hey, listen. I mean, do they have a language? There's got to be some way they communicate.
Look at the way chimps behave. We've seen the video and it was a fairly large group that went into hunting mode, and they already knew what to do. There wasn't any chatter. There wasn't anything. The alpha of the group kind of went on its hands, slapped its feet against the tree, and they all fell into line and knew exactly what their roles were. So if they're raised this way, it's possible. Again, it's an unknown, but that could very well be the mechanism that's happening there. It's something they are raised doing. So when these various situations happen, they go off the alpha's cue and they fall right into these behavioral patterns or modes.
I did find that interesting. I found that extremely interesting that the chimps would do that. They had these signals, and everybody knew what to do.
Yeah, there was no communication. They all knew exactly what their roles were.
Yeah, right. And talking about their intelligence, moving on a little bit, there was a video, I don't know if I sent it to you or not, but it's kind of cute. One of these larger chimp species, and I apologize, it was either the bonobo or the billy ape, was raised or trained by a primatologist. And she would build a campfire, and then she roasted marshmallows. This thing watched. She didn't really show it. It watched. And it definitely had a preference They like marshmallows, but like us, they preferred the roasted ones, right?
Right.
And this thing would take matches. It would take a bunch of sticks, build a fire, build a little campfire, and then it would start shoving marshmallows onto a stick, and it would roast them and eat them. I'm like, I get that.
Hey, well, sure, they mimic behaviors.
Yeah, and it just shows their level of intelligence.
Oh, yeah. And these things are much more intelligent.
Yeah.
Right? I just thought it was kind of funny. I had a preference for roasted marshmallows versus the regular ones.
Well, we're out of time, fellas. We'll leave that for next week. We'll pick up, and hopefully we can get John to come on with us. He can give some better explanations from an anthropologist point of view.
Yeah, for sure.
And have your marshmallows ready.
Any final thoughts, fellas, before we close out?
No, just another great session, I think.
Great session, and I want to thank Fred and his new or the co-teacher. We love those questions. You guys are doing great. Thanks.
Yeah, and for Fred's students, if we missed any of your questions, let us know, and we'll address those next week.
Yes.
All right, fellas. Great talk. Everyone stay tuned for the third segment in Jim's readings.
Welcome. This story is being brought to you by William Jevning and is being narrated by me, Jim Sower. The name of this story, Two Tales of the Yeho. Curious Legend of the Kentucky Mountains, 4 or 5 versions of this curious and strange legend, come into my collection over a period of about 6 years, 1948 to 1954, from an isolated region of the Kentucky mountains. At first I did not know what to make of it, but having also collected a few versions of The Bear's Son, story minus the half-bear, half-man introduction, I guessed that this was the introduction now broken away and told separately. It now appears to be a distinct legend, since Dr. Archer Taylor refers me to the long search for American versions by Mr. Rudolph Atrachi. And now that I reflect on this item, I realize that it is not unique to Kentucky mountain folklore. During my youth in these mountains, it was not unusual to hear a rumor of some half-wild man, naked and hairy, being found in the woods, living close to animal state. This kind of Romulus Remus legend seems to stick in the minds of the folk, but how this particular legend made its way into eastern Kentucky is a mystery to me. The following version was taken down in pencil in 1950 from the lips of Lee Maggard, who lived in a small cabin on the south slope of the Pine Mountain Range near the small lumber town of Putney, Harlan County, Kentucky. He had heard it on Maggard's Branch, Leslie County, Kentucky. The Yeho. Once there was man out hunting. He got lost, and after a while he began to get hungry. He came to a big hole in the ground, and he thought he would venture down into it. He went down in there, and he found that the old Yeho lived in there. There was deer meat hanging up, and other food piled around the walls. The man was afraid at first, but Yeho didn't bother him, and he went toward that meat to get him some. The Yeho walked over and looked at the knife and said, "Yeho, Yeho," a time or two. He cut it off a piece of the meat, and he started eating it. Well, the man stepped over to the middle of the pit and took out his flint and built him up a fire. And the Yeho watched him and looked at the fire and at the flint and said, "Yeho, Yeho," again. The man put his meat on a stick and broiled him a nice piece and started eating it. The Yeho watched him and acted like he wanted a piece. The man cut it off a piece of the broiled meat and reached it over, and the Yeho commenced to eating it up and smacking its lips and saying, Yeho, Yeho. Well, the man lived there with it a long time, and they got along all right. After so long, there was a young'un born to him, and it was half man and half Yeho. And the Yeho took such a liking to the man, it wouldn't let him leave. He got to wanting to get away and go back home. One day he slipped off and the Yeho followed him and made him go back. Went on that way for a good while, but he picked him a good time and slipped away. This time he got to the shore where there was a ship ready to sail. He got on the ship, and he looked, and he saw the Yeho coming with a young'un. It screamed and hollered for him to come back, and when it saw he wasn't going to come, why, it just tore the baby in two and held it out, one half to him, and said, Yeho, Yeho! He sailed on off and left it standing there. The version that Dr. Taylor refers to in my book, South from Hell for Sartin, is called The Origin of Man. Another version was given to me by this teller's grandson. It has the same title and contents, except that the Yeho has 6 children and tears them all in two and throws them after the embarked man. Another text, similar to the one given above, was accidentally erased from my tapes. The following text was recorded from Joe Couch, Appalachia, Virginia, in 1954. He had heard it from his people while he lived in Perry County, Kentucky. The Hairy Woman. One time I was prowling in the wilderness, wandering about, kindly got lost, and so weak and hungry I couldn't go. When it began to get cool, I found a big cave and crawled back in there to get warm. Crawled back in and come upon a leaf bed, and I dozed off to sleep. I heard an awful racket coming into that cave, and something come in and crawled right over me and laid down like a big old bear. It was a hairy thing, and when it laid down, it went chomp, chomp, chawing on something. I thought to myself, I'll see what it is and find out what it's eating. I reached over, and a hairy-like woman was there eating chestnuts. Had about a half a bushel there. I got me a big handful of them and went to chewing on them too. Well, in a few minutes, she handed me over another big handful, and I eat chestnuts until I was kindly full and wasn't hungry any more. Directly she got up and took off and out of sight. Well, I stayed on there till next morning, and she come in with a young deer. Brought it in, and with her big long fingernails she ripped its hide and skinned it, and then she sliced the good lean meat and handed me a bite to eat. I kindly slipped it behind me, afraid to eat it raw and afraid not to eat it, being she give it to me. She'd cut off big pieces of deer meat and eat it raw. Well, I laid back, and the other pieces she give me over as she eaten hers. She was going to see that I didn't starve. When she got gone again, I built up a little fire and broiled my meat. After being hungry for 2 or 3 days, it was good cooked. Yes, buddy. She come in while I had a fire. She come in while I had my fire built, broiling my meat, and she run right into that fire. She couldn't understand because it kindly burnt her a little. She jumped back and looked at me like she was going to run through me. I said, uh-oh, I'm going to get in trouble now. Well, it was cold and bad out, so I just stayed another night with her. She was a woman, but was right hairy all over. After several days, I learned her how to broil meat, and that fire would burn her. She got shy of the fire, and got so she liked broiled meat and wouldn't eat it raw any more. We went on through the winter that way. She would go out and carry in deer and bear. So I lived there about 2 years, and when we had a little kid, one side of it was hairy and the other side was slick. I took a notion I'd leave there and go back home. I began to build me a boat to go away across the lake in. One time after I had left, I took a notion I'd slip back and see what she was doing. I went out to the edge of the cliff and looked down into the mountain, and it looked like 2 or 3 dozen of hairy people coming up the hill. They were all pressing her, and she would push them back. They wanted to come on up and come in. I was scared to death, afraid they was going to kill me. She made them go back and wouldn't let them come up and interfere. Well, I took a notion to leave one day when my boat was ready. I told her one day I was going to leave. She followed me down to my boat and watched me get ready to go away. She was crying, wanting me to stay. I said, "No, I'm tired of the jungles. I'm going back to civilization again, going back." When she knowed she wasn't going to keep me there, she just grabbed the little one and tore it right open with her nails, throwed me the hairy part, and she kept the slick side. That's the end of that story. This is the end of the story. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out there.